I do love me some Black folk. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Centering Justice. CJ is a dream space. Ooh, and dreams are coming true today. It's a podcast of possibilities. If you're new here, every episode we amplify the voices of Black and brown and melanated dreamers and change makers and doers and believers and poets who shift us from the current conditions we know about into deeper explorations of what could be. Together, we hold faith and belief that the future will be different. So welcome, everybody. On this month's episode, Poems and Praise, we're asking, how do poets and other cultural workers help us fit together the pieces of our experiences, our lives, and our futures? Joining us is Nandi Comer. Nandi is Poet Laureate of Michigan. She was raised in my hometown, Detroit, in the shrine of the Black Madonna. Me too, Nandi. She attended foreign language immersion and communications and media arts high school and studied English and Spanish with an emphasis on Latin American culture at U of M. Her poems and essays have appeared in numerous journals, newspapers, and magazines. She's the author of American Family, Syndrome, and Tapping Out, which won her several awards. And in 2016, Nandi completed an MA in African American Literature from the Department of African American and African Diaspora Studies and an MFA in Poetry from the English Department at Indiana University. Nandi's worked as a poetry workshop leader and mentor with various organizations, including Inside Out, Literary Arts Project, Living Arts, and YARTS. She is the co-director of Detroit Lit, a project to support narrative makers of color in Detroit. And she has received numerous fellowships, including a translation fellowship by U.S. poets in Mexico. And our homegirl, my homegirl, is a 2019 Kresge Literary Arts Fellows. Y'all, listen, sit down, settle in, prepare your minds, your hearts, your bodies for what will be surely a insightful, depthful, and poetic conversation. You know, I always like to share with y'all what's on my mind. And Nandi asked me when we joined, "You still doing work, sis?" I said, "No." Usually what's on my mind drops in just before I get started. And this morning, there's never a mistake. I had a core memory surface that I had not thought of in quite a while. My mom, who I've talked about on this podcast many a time, Cassandra Johnson Levitt, our ancestor, used to read Langston Hughes's poem, Mother to a Son, to me when I was very young. Hughes writes, "Well, son, I'll tell you, life for me ain't been no crystal stair. It had tacks in it, splinters, and boards torn up, and places with no carpet on the floor, bare. But all the time I's been a climbing on and reaching landings and turning corners, and sometimes going in the dark where there ain't been no light. So boy, don't you turn back. Don't you set down on the steps because you finds it kind of hard. Don't you fall. For I's still going, honey. I's still climbing. And life for me ain't been no crystal stair." I didn't know it then, of course, that it was a love letter to me. It was a way of using prose and poem to speak life into me. And I can't wait to read that poem to my son later tonight. In fact, I was like, why didn't you read this poem to this boy? And that's the thing about poetry, y'all. For me, it gets down in my bones. It tells me things about myself that I didn't remember. It shows me things that I have yet to discover about myself. Just before the pandemic, I joined a collective of women of color organized by Julie Quiros, who some folks may know. The group, which was called Untold Stories of Love and Liberation, gathered to write and to become what would be a space for many of us to write together, to be together, to rest together, to imagine together. And even though I had written before, it wasn't until that space that I would say out loud I was a poet. And I wrote since that time, since 2019, probably 50 poems. It was like they poured out of me, y'all. Somebody put me in a space where those words could flow, where parts of myself could become visible, and I didn't stop. It was also a space for respite during the pandemic. And so I wrote and I prayed and I leaned on radical imagination to get me through that time. And I believe it's probably where centering justice emerged too, like the power of the story, the power of words, the power of speaking into myself and others what was possible. And many years later, in fact, last fall, I was invited to speak at an event at the University of Michigan Museum of Art. It was called Free to Speak, and we were celebrating David Drake, a acclaimed potter who also was enslaved, and he was a maverick. And I sat down among a room full of beautiful, mostly Black folks who were descendants of potters, who were also artists in their own right. And this beautiful person sort of meandered either near or close to the table. And between the moment we met and now, it was very apparent to me that I was meeting a kindred spirit, right? Nandi sat down next to me, and I was telling her a minute ago, I don't know what, I was fluxing over something, which I do, spreading myself out and trying to get my notes together or something to speak later, much like I was doing today. And she just kind of cozied up next to me, and we end up sitting together. And the anointing on Nandi was so strong, I felt it more than I could articulate what it was. And we broke bread together that day, Nandi. And two folks just intersecting at pottery and art and poetry and liberation and justice. And while today is only the second time we've been together, I thank you for receiving my call a few weeks ago when you dropped in my spirit and saying yes to being my guest. As we recognize April, which is a month where, you know, nationally we celebrate poetry, but really for me today, this is about celebrating you, about celebrating what it means for you, Nandi Comer, to be our state's poet laureate, what it means to amplify your work here and for others to know that they are in the presence of one of our greats, our modern and contemporary greats. So thank you. Thank you for being with me. How you doing today?
I am great. Now I'm here with everybody. Thank you so much for just these wonderful words you just shared. Oh, I always feel like change for the better when you speak. So thank you.
You're welcome. So, you know, I uplifted one of many identities you have right now as our poet laureate, but we always invite guests on CJ to bring their whole selves into the space. It is an act of um, resistance to us being squeezed into really narrow definitions of who we are, but it also celebrates the multiplicity of the identities we have that are interacting with one another in unique ways. So bring yourself in here. Tell us about the identities and communities that you'll be drawing upon for our conversation, Nandi.
Mm. Yeah. I always, when I get asked that, I always like think about where I'm sitting at now, where I'm coming from today. And it's definitely always almost foremost Detroit is with me. It's always on me. I'm a second generation removed from Alabama.
Mm,
I I'm a daughter, I'm a DJ, I'm a stepdaughter too, and a sister and a sibling, and I'm an educator and I'm a poet.
mm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I loved as we were preparing for today. What you doing? Me and my brother eating ribs and fries. I was like, that's so Detroit. That's so black. I loved it. I loved it.
I tell them a business.
Ain't nothing wrong with that. Ain't nothing wrong with a rib.
I had
Like,
some
what's
leftovers this morning too. Yep.
good for you? Good for you. I thought about them ribs all night long. I was like, I didn't catch the name.
Ah.
Well, another thing we ask every guest, and it's mostly my curiosity, Nandi. I am always interested in like what are those moments where we know we're being transformed and transforming, right? Because it's dynamic, it's not a destination. How is the way we're working or what we're working on changing us forever? And so, part of like my story is once I could see that this field that I work in, not the social sector, the nonprofit sector, that like its roots are in settler colonialism. Its roots are in, benevolence and charity as opposed to justice. And so once I could see that, it began to transform everything I did and every way I moved in the work, right? What I talked about, even centering justice is, born of like, wow, there are too many times I'm in spaces talking about the future without folks like you and I in those spaces. And so I'm just kind of curious about the times, the points where you knew poetry and your work with other narrative and cultural workers was transforming you. How was that happening? When did you know?
I think, well, I like this question a lot. A lot of people also ask me, like, when did I know I was a poet too? And
Mm,
I think like transforming is really spot on. And I think as someone who has grown up writing, who grew up journaling, who grew up doing different things, it has been like, ever since my first journal was put in my hands, I feel like transformative process constantly moving in me. So for me, it doesn't there is no like no entry point into that transformative process because creativity has always been a part of my like what my mind is attracted to. And
mm,
so, um, but I will say that like, I can think about like where I'm immediately right now transforming to. And part of that is, I've been thinking a lot about, um, you know, feeling like I'm not enough or feeling like I don't know enough to be where I am. And only recently, and it'll probably come back again, imposter syndrome will probably come back again in some kind of way, but it's been a year since they appointed me to this position. And while I understand why they selected me, I still would go, well, somebody's going to figure it out. Somebody's going to figure out that I don't belong here, right? Or somebody is hating on me. I'm sure somebody, and they have every right to hate on me for holding this position so early in my career. But I had two events happen where I was with some very accomplished writers, like national poet laureates and national award New York Times bestsellers. And I was asked to prepare like a questions and lead conversation with them. And it was like for the first time in a while that I felt like, oh no, I was the right person for this. I don't think anyone else could have led this conversation. I was the one. And and I could go down a list of many people that could have done it, but it wouldn't have been the way that I would have done it. And because of how successful those conversations and how lightning those conversations are, I'm starting to feel like there's a shift now in like my ability to like pose a process of inquiry, a process of questions, a process of writing towards what our cultural imaginary is. So I feel like I'm in that transformative process right now.
I love that. And right at the end, you like took it from the way in which you're transforming, healing, because I think the world tells us, I don't think we're born thinking we don't belong. The world tells us that and reinforces it. So you're combating this imposter syndrome through practice, right? Like maybe doing the things that scare you anyway.
Well, and I don't think that in my work, I don't think about imposter syndrome. I think sometimes we don't think about the question that might be where imposter syndrome might be behind. So I might say like, well, what's at stake if this event isn't successful?
Mhm.
Or who will be left with more questions if I don't ask this question? Or will the people who paid me go home satisfied? And that's imposter
Mhm.
syndrome because you're questioning whether or not you have the ability to fulfill what you've been asked to do. And you know, it's there, but I think recently I think I'm in a space where I own a particular space that I was invited to do that I was not didn't think I was prepared for, and it was not the obstacle or this incredible it was like I actually was prepared to do this. I was made to do this, you
Come
know.
on now. Come on now. I was made to do this. But then there was a piece at the end, and I actually lost it. I think you said our cultural imagination. Is that what you,
Yeah, so
what is that?
I
Yeah.
think of writers as helping us to translate the things that we either internally or externally experience. And I think that particularly Black writers have the capacity of being documenters and being the ones that help to preserve an understanding of what is happening in our time period.
Mm,
Um, in other art forms, I think maybe like visual arts is maybe the only other art form that really helps us understand where we are culturally. Um, and so when writers set out to write about the world or write about other writing, it's documenting, but also interpreting the world that we're experiencing right now. And I think that right now we are, and it's not new, but I think that we are challenging what we think of ourselves,
mhm.
right? There's this cultural imaginary, this national cultural imaginary that we have, and we all have it, whether it's like Black folk, African American cultural imaginary, and then but the United States cultural imaginary and what we think of ourselves. And I think that in a way, my writing helps to either uplift the ways in which some people have been erased from that cultural imaginary or challenge that cultural imaginary and say, hey, is that real? Do you really, are we really this way? Have we considered these other things? Um, if that's true, then what about this? You know? So,
It's
yeah.
interesting you say that. I allowed myself to get pulled into, of all places, the next door app post. Um, but I think the reason I did is because the post was about something I've been wrestling with. The U of M put out some draft policy about protests, and the idea it underneath it is this idea of like not protesting while people, you know, the right to free speech. So not protesting in places while people are speaking so that they can be heard. And that's like my very distilled version of what President Ono was working on. But the person who posted was actually kind of provoked some thought in me about free speech. And we won't spend a lot of time here, but you're making me think about it. My response was not that I don't think, actually, I told the story of when I first moved to Ann Arbor. The Ku Klux Klan was rallying in downtown Ann Arbor. Now, mind you, I had come from Detroit, and
When was this? Because they do it all the time. When was this?
it was in the late 90s. And I was still in high school. And my thoughts weren't as eloquent as they are now, but I remember thinking like, who who allows you know, all I knew at that point about the KKK was the lynching of Black people in the South. So my young mind could not put together how whoever had allowed that to happen under the guise of free speech. I was petrified that day. I remember thinking, what if they come and get me? Right. And and so when you talk about cultural imagination and is this who we are, or is there something else we can be? I wondered in what America, I mean, of course we know, but like in what America could we have a group that ideologically is so juxtaposed to the values we espouse in this country, and what would lead us to say they have a right to speak or a right to you know, and so I just found it's something that I've struggled with, and then even today in a separate conversation, we were talking about how um, Germany talks about remembering, right? It's sort of a part of the zeitgeist there to talk about remembering their role in the Holocaust and what it felt like for me as a Black bodied person to be in Germany and to see that, but to belong to a country that has yet to reckon and atone with its complicity in the trafficking and displacement of human beings. And so, like, to tie this cultural imagination piece, I love that about poetry, about the visual arts, about the written word, that it can sort of cast for us possibilities. At least that's been the way in which it's served me, is as a way, almost as a way to propel us into a future that may not exist now. And I often cling to that.
Hmm.
I often cling
Yeah,
to
yeah. I mean, I think that that's something that the US will always have to reckon with, that there is no one true narrative of what we all have been experiencing, but that what we're really dealing with now, particularly now, is that there are those who are aggressively trying to forget. It's not like
right.
beforehand there was a, well, we just won't teach that. Well, yeah, that happened, but why dwell on the past? It happened. But now people, for the sake of their own comfort, are literally trying to erase history out of, you know, and they're banning us from talking about it. And so on the one hand, you're talking about the respect of free speech. And then on the other hand, we're talking about this approach to story making, this approach to like history making and documenting, and saying like, no, 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 you get to talk, you get to talk. And as long as we don't feel uncomfortable, you can
Right.
talk.
Right.
As soon as we get uncomfortable, nope, shut it down. As soon as you are asking us to be accountable, shut it down. As soon as you're asking us to reckon with what our ancestors have done, we're not interested in that.
Hmm.
Only, only when it benefits them.
Right.
right? And
Absolutely.
so, and I'm thinking about this for so many folk when people don't understand the presence of Arab Americans in Southeastern Michigan, or why Hmong people are in Southeastern Michigan, or it's just, or the financial crises that we're going through, while at the same time celebrating people who cause financial crises in our city. These are stories that people don't want to talk about. They'd rather move on to more comfortable stories, more
Mm-hmm.
narratives. And I think with my poetry, I try to push push us to think about the perspective that isn't being represented, you know.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we could hear a little bit of your poetry. Would you
I would
like
love
to
to.
share a piece? Yeah.
I would love to. So the two poems I brought today are actually, they're not in either of the books. They're newer poems. And so the first one I'm going to read is called The Check-In. I wrote it during the pandemic, but I think that it really gets to some of the ways in which a lot of us feel when something go down and then you hear from people you haven't heard from in a while. The check-in. They call, they message, then the occasional tag on social media. I'm wanting to check in on you. We are thinking of you. I'm so, so sorry. Then there I go again, pounding my head, sifting through thick air, scattering names on a dusty floor. It is morning. It is the afternoon, maybe the middle of some god-awful hour. I was calm. I was hunkered low, shades drawn, maybe sipping tea. No one should see me pacing kitchen to porch to bedroom, grabbing at lint or shaking my wrist in the mirror. Don't call. Don't remind me there are soldiers tramping on my lawn with gas and pepper spray. I have laid the sheets tight in my bed. I've just trimmed the plants, and you are so white and so fragile with your checking, and you are so late, so late, so late. Um, should I read the second one, or do you want to?
You should do whatever the hell you want to do.
Um, well, that one's more connected to what we were talking
Yeah.
about how our experiences are oftentimes, sometimes they're even by well-meaning folk, they're ignored until they absolutely can't ignore them. And then you get allies all of a sudden.
Can we stay
And
there for a
so
second? Because that is, can we just stay there for a second? I mean, you talked about writing this during the pandemic, and those of us who have been working with folks who have been pushed to the margins not only could have told you what was going to happen, but had been telling you what was going to happen. We have been talking about health disparities in Washtenaw County for a decade before the pandemic. And that's just that I'm aware of. I'm sure others have been talking about it. We've been talking about the economic disparities in Detroit for decades, centuries. Our own John Conyers introduced the House bill around reparations 50 years ago,
yeah.
right? And And so this idea of like checking in or becoming an ally when it's convenient, I often say not only when it's convenient, but then folk do just enough to alleviate their own feelings of complicity in the issue, but never quite enough to eradicate it,
Mhm. I
right?
think it's also important for folks to understand that we will reach out to the folks that we feel are within our support network, our support community. Um, and oftentimes, like what happens in this poem is when somebody is calling on you, you're actually carrying the weight of their
Mhm.
anxiety. They're calling so that
You ain't been calling me.
people want to call so that they can figure out
Feel
what's
better.
going on with you. And it may be not to feel better, but to feel like what they're experiencing isn't something, it's something that can be resolved with a call with you, right? And I had a lot of people who I hadn't heard from for years start to reach out to me and ask me about things that were happening on the news. And what they didn't understand is that that's labor that they're asking of me. And that too creates a space of anxiety for my own mind and my own process of trying to, you know, take in everything with folk that I trust and care about. I don't need somebody who ain't never paid attention come, what's going on? That's not something I can hold for you. So please don't come to me now. You
Yeah.
need a study group. It's not my study group, you know? It's
Right.
not, these aren't
Right.
things that I can hold for you. And I think that it's it's unfortunate because I've had friends say, well, what am I supposed to do? And I'm like, I just can't be the person you can ask. Like that, and that's creating sometimes boundaries, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad that people became interested, and I think that there are some people who are much better at offering resources in times of crisis,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
But I'm one of those people that's like, I'm gonna offer you resources all year. You're not gonna take them, and then you're gonna come to me during a crisis. I can't do that. I've been giving you this stuff all year.
Yeah.
I've been writing these poems, publishing these poems, doing these speaking engagements, and now you want to come to me. I can't do that. You know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, but
Yeah.
I think a lot of times I don't think that all of my conversations are necessarily adversarial, you know. I think that part of it is just a genuine like wanting to think about, you know, history and thinking and just putting it up for folks to look at and examine. And so I'm gonna read the second poem. The second poem is very personal to me. I just want to introduce it a little bit because there are two things that are happening in the poem. I'm on a formal level, like in the poetry world, it's an abecedarian poem.
Mm.
Didn't nobody ask you, Siri? Um, it's a Siri's doing something. I don't know.
She
So
like what you're talking about too.
she's it's the
Abecedarian.
abecedarian poem, which just means that at the beginning of every line is a letter of the alphabet A, B, C, D,
Oh.
and it goes on. And it's a very old form that people have used for a long
Mm.
time. A lot about how Black women have been experiencing, particularly their experience with going to get mammograms and having their bodies examined, and the ways in which we're spoken to. And so this is the second in a series of abecedarian poems that are actually based on the bra sizing system. So it's A, B, C, D, double D, E. So it goes like that. I know y'all can't see it, but it's something that I accomplished. So I just wanted to tell you all that. This one is according to the European size chart, bra abecedarian. All Black breasts must come to make this offering, this bend of glands against machine, this painful press, the cold squeeze, the text with their tugging. Your breasts are so dense. Black women's are always so thick, so, dark, dense. Our bodies are murky, heavy experiments in their hands. We unmanageable filaments. When surgeons say mass, they are not gentle. They insist abnormal, more imaging, extraction, granular strands loop around nipples and fat. Here, gloved hands handle all Black breasts like specimens, ingrown mutations, gross to be operated, judged. In the waiting room, we are routine procedures, jagged jewels growing in our chests, turn hard to the touch. And they keep with their clippings of us. They submit us to their unkindness. Keloids cake over our cleavage. Dark, lonely trails curve around our nipples, under our breasts, leave lingering scars, forever pulling at the threads of our living.
I want to like kind of let that breathe a little bit. There were a flurry of images and thoughts that came to my mind as a fuller figure woman, like the way BMI is weaponized, right? And the story, how so much of how we perceive ourselves is through a lens of European aesthetic, right? And um, the othering that's happening in the um, medical procedures, even when we're trying to be, proactive and preventative and follow the rules and go to the test and do the things that there is for me a baseline of anxiety every time because I'm certain I'm going to go into that room and you're going to tell me something is
Mhm.
not meeting your standard, right? Um,
Right. Part.
and
You
then you
know,
will sell me a short term, you know, product,
mhm,
drug, solution, what have you, but never name how is it that these fibroids grew in my uterus?
mhm,
Is it that,
mhm,
this autoimmune disorder is absolutely, tied to the generational impacts of enslavement, of, torture, of the
mhm,
wounds our ancestors passed through their wombs,
mhm.
and it's
Oh
so
yeah.
cold. Not to mention, can't nobody figure out how to look at my breasts without squeezing them in that damn thing. Really.
So here's the other thing that I think that I really want to give to every Black woman before they go into the mammogram room. Oftentimes, I literally am quoting what they say to me every time. I'm 44 now, and so I've had my share of mammograms already, and I've already had a benign tumor extracted. And
Mm,
what they say every time is, well, Black women, y'all bodies are just so dense, we can't see really. And so what I just wish I have told Tex to say, I was like, you really have to change your narrative. The machines that have not been designed to see us
mm,
were probably tested on white women. And that's why they can't see through our dense muscle.
mhm,
Had you tested it against Black women, had they tested these machines against Black women's bodies, we
mhm.
probably would have an adequate machine that could see the bodies of billions of people in this on this
Yeah,
globe, right?
yeah.
But what we do is we blame Black women's bodies for us not being able for them not being able to see or identify things, and
Mm,
it cost us more. It cost us more by having to do more imaging. We're
mm.
always having to sit longer in the line because we have to do more imaging because they didn't see us on the first time. So now we got to go to a different
You gotta
machine to
go
get.
back. Yeah, yeah.
And then we have to go see a surgeon to make sure it's okay. And then we have to go see a specialist to see if it's okay. And then and then they say, well, y'all don't come to your appointments, even though they put us through the stress and stress and stress and stress again at every single appointment. And then they wonder why Black women are leading in the populations of breast cancer, right?
Mm,
Because there isn't enough conversation about the way that we are received
yeah,
during our appointments, the way that they treat our bodies during appointments,
yeah.
how it is more expensive to be healthy as a Black woman,
Mhm,
right?
mm,
It's just so for me, it's not lost on me. I've been writing these poems about Black womanhood from girlhood up until now. And it's been, I hear people say that all the time. I'm just writing poems about Black womanhood. And I get it. It's very liberating. It is very liberating just to concentrate on us and our experiences, you know?
mm. Yeah. I I'm experiencing in this moment the way in which our personhood is political. This is the
Mhm,
person what is political, right?
mhm, mhm.
I told you that I wanted to have a conversation about, poetry and justice, and yet I didn't want it to feel contrived. I didn't want to feel like, so how exactly are your poems attending to, you know,
Oh,
um,
just give me a minute. I'll show you. Oh yeah. I mean, I write all kinds of poems. And I don't set out to be um I don't set out to say, well, this isn't speaking to any politics, so this poem isn't important. I have poems that are about dancing. I have poems that are about my relationship to nature. And I think those two, the audacity to write outside of what is expected of Black writers is also an act of resistance to
yeah,
write beautiful poems. Because there is like sometimes when you show up, people just I'm not a slam poet, and I love slam poetry. I love to watch other people do it because I am not a good slam poet. I'm not a good performance poet. And so, but it's incredible to see. But when I walk into a room and you've never heard my work, and the first thing you say is, well, we normally don't feature slam poets. That's me saying, oh, you need this nature poem because you have no idea what Black poets do. You don't,
mm,
it's an act of resistance to the expectations that we placed on Black poets.
yes. You talked about nature, and when we first met, you were talking about places and choices you've made, places you've put your body, and places you've chose. Detroit always being your home, but you've talked also, I mean, I have this image of you in my mind. I don't know where. I've never been to Vermont. Nandi gonna tell y'all about times she's been in Vermont, but I'm trying to visualize this beautiful Black sister in Vermont of all places. I think all I know is like a cheese, maybe. So I'm curious. I want to talk about place. I want to talk about you and place, and I want you to get into that in whatever way feels good for you. But I will say that what's kind of behind this for me is one of my favorite places in Michigan to go to is Idlewild. And when I'm just trying to like quickly say why, it's one of the few places other than when I visited the continent where I feel like I can kind of pull off the masks, if you will. And it's not in a way that has anything is such a like more esoteric or existential feeling of just like it's an exhale when I'm there. And it is a place where I often feel the fullness of my freedom. So I've become very curious. I have wanderlust. I mean, anyway, and folks that know me know I'm very curious about the world and about different cultures and about immersing myself. So I'm coming into this kind of like curious and wanting to know more about you and about place and about Vermont.
Okay. Well, okay. So what Yodit hasn't mentioned is that like I've lived in a lot of places. I've visited a lot of places. I write about a lot of places. My first full-length collection has a lot of poems about a time when I lived in Mexico. And um, and so I started, somehow I got it in my head that I needed to study abroad as a Spanish major. I decided I needed to study abroad, and I remember my interview. I told the the professors, they asked why Spain. And I thought, well, if I can get to Spain, I can get to anywhere. And I truly firmly believe that. And as a person from Detroit who had only really gone to like Toronto as like the most, and for Detroiters, that's like going to Chicago. Don't nobody think about Toronto as being an international place. And I think at the time you didn't even need a passport to go. So, and that has proven to be true. Like if since that initial step off of the border into Spain, my fear of borders is it's not there. It is like a border culturally, racially, and physically around people. I think that there are great people in all over the world, and I think that there are some horrible people all over the world too. That said, what has become for me this very foundational connection to Detroit, it has meant that a lot happens in Detroit. There's a lot of busyness. There's a lot of demand in Detroit. And so oftentimes I find that I need to step away in order to readjust, like kind of like going to an acupuncturist or a chiropractor and getting your spine readjusted. Sometimes I have to get my mental calm readjusted. And so sometimes it looks like going out to Vermont. I first went to Vermont as a artist in residence on a residency at Vermont Studio Center as a poet. And it's something about the anonymity and something about being in a place where the only thing I had that was familiar was my writing and a space to work. And I think Vermont, like honestly, Vermont is a beautiful state. It's one of the few states that has outlawed billboards, for example. And so you have uninterrupted nature when you are going in and out of towns, mountains, beautiful. It's a shame that it is one of the whitest states in the union. Like it competes with I think Maine every year. Maine or Vermont is like the whitest state in the nation. I think they're down to like the third whitest this year. And so that is a challenge for me, being in spaces where I'm not surrounded by people that have the same background and history and kind of like perspective as me. It's a challenge, but it's not I can overcome that because it doesn't mean that there aren't people that are of the same thinking as I am.
Right.
And so what happens is I use spaces out of Detroit to kind of like take rest, as you were talking about. Idlewild has been that place for me sometimes too, but Indiana has been that place. Honestly, sometimes just going places where even if they know me, I don't tell people that I'm there has helped, because I think oftentimes when we travel, people are like, let's fill up the itinerary. We're gonna go here on Monday, I don't want that. I just want to chill. Or I
Right.
want to be able to have like a whole half a day where I don't get to talk to any of y'all. And I just am by myself and like in my head and able to like just kind of reset and calm my brain.
Mhm.
And it really helps my creative practice.
Yeah, I love um there's something this idea of like these very white places, but still being able to find your center and also to find folks that you can connect with. That I think is so inviting because I do think we limit ourselves by saying like, oh, that place isn't for me, or there's no one else there like me. It's the way in which this pseudo-scientific conditioning of whiteness and white supremacy will cause us,
Mm,
and I get it, some of it is about safety, but also I
right.
think about the places that we miss or don't consider. I started to try, like I went on I was a part of a transatlantic fellowship in Europe, and um, I remember like wanting to have this experience of visiting, 5 countries in Europe on somebody else's dime, right? And
Mm,
also I was like, a little afraid, of what of like the stories of what Europe was. And when I got to Greece in particular, I remember thinking that Athens was so much like Detroit. Like so many parts of Athens reminded me of the city. The same happened actually when I was in Addis in the capital of Ethiopia. I saw the
Mhm.
faces of people I knew from my neighborhood. And it was like, I was like, God dog it, like these are descendants. So I love and then this piece around quiet and
Yeah.
solace that is
Mhm.
itself such an antidote to capitalism and hyperproductivity and urgency. Do you find, Nandi, that quiet, you talked a little bit about writing. You've also said you don't just go to write. Sometimes you really are going to quiet your mind. Do you do you find that the work emerges from those experiences, whether it's happening there or elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's the space. I think a lot of it has to do with having uninterrupted time.
Mm,
Um, let's just be real. When we are at home, we look around and we go, oh, I need to sweep that floor. I have to wash those dishes. I have to do here. I gotta go there. I have errands to run today.
mhm,
And sometimes we aren't like thinking like, okay, what if I didn't do anything today but practice whatever this practice that I'm trying to invite into my life? We
mm.
very rarely give ourselves permission for that.
Tr
And I
Trisha Hersey says, "How do we make ourselves unavailable to capitalism?" Right.
right. But I
Hmm.
mean, it's also if we have families, if we have, if we have if we have organizations to run, whatever those things are that you have in your daily day and your daily to-dos, it means for me, travel means that I have a cutoff date. I'm
Mm,
doing it right now. I have a trip to Vermont planned right at the end of May through the beginning of June. And just by saying that I am unavailable, it means that all the requests that come through, all of the demands, anyone that's trying to book, you can't. I'm not gonna be here. And
mhm,
it's so much harder for me as the personality to have. If I'm in town, I'm like, I think I can make it work. Like I will, even if I don't have anything that day, and somebody says, hey, can we talk right quick? Oh yeah, yeah. Just give me. I'm free. I'm free. With the way of like harder for me, and I'm just gonna admit it. I don't try to like, you know, I tried to be somebody else. I'm not. And that this is how I am. And so the way that I have tried to reconcile that is I need to go places to get uninterrupted time. 2 hours a day, 1 hour a day of writing is not enough.
mhm,
Sometimes I need to have like a couple of days of just like checking out, not checking my email, doing, just being meditative in that meditative practice for me. I really admire people that can do it at any moment, at the drop of a dime, say they're not going to schedule anything tomorrow and have uninterrupted time. It doesn't work for me. I will be at the grocery store by 11 o'clock trying to like make sure I have dinner made, things that you don't realize take a lot out of your concentration, but it does for me.
yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned, I'm curious kind of about your process when you are here. I remember so I do write poetry, but my big, hairy, audacious goal is to write this book, a love letter to Black and Brown social change leaders. And I've retreated to write. In fact, have a retreat coming up. And sometimes it hits, and other times it doesn't. But one thing I'm aware of is that there is some discipline in writing. And you talk about, the grocery shopping at 11 o'clock, but you have a practice for writing and a discipline. You want to talk about that a little bit, how the poetry emerges and sort of what your day looks like. It's very different than what I thought. Uh-oh, I think you hit mute.
I thought I unmuted myself, and I guess I'm muted. I don't, anyway. Well, I'm curious, like, what did you think I had my practice was?
Oh, well, what I understand is that you get up pretty early. You remind me, Toni Morrison said this, which stuck with me. She wrote from 4 to 7 every day.
Yeah.
Even
Yeah.
when
So
she had children, that was, in fact, because she had children, she would get up very early and write, which is a discipline I'm trying to develop.
so I began in my day writing. Um, I read first.
Mhm.
So that's part of my practice is always in the reading first before thinking I'm gonna get anything done. I believe you should be reading much more than what you write. As simple as that. And so
Are you reading
I
poetry?
wake up, I read everything. I just got done reading a book of essays by Tracy K. Smith. I always have a book of poems that I'm reading, but
Mm,
I started Jasmine Ward's recent novel. And so I read nonfiction, fiction. I tend to read those during the day and poetry in the morning.
okay.
Uh, it's something about poetry. What happened a long time ago, probably back in 2007, 2008, I was, an entry level nonprofit administrator. And I would wake up and, I would sleep until 7, wake up, get dressed by 8:30, be at the house and be at work at 9. And
Mhm.
then the writing is gonna come at the end of the day. Well, of course it wasn't, because I would work all day. And I was so angry at myself for allowing my job to take my best energy.
Mm,
And so that's the way I conceive of it. Whatever I want to focus on most is what will get my first energy.
what we feed grows. Yeah.
And so at the beginning of the pandemic, when all of us was distraught, I woke up and I stretched every morning, because that was the one thing that I was not doing. That was the thing I wasn't paying attention to. And so whatever I wanted to be intentional about has been the thing that I wake up first and do. Apparently, I am more interested in coffee than poetry, because I make sure I have coffee before I even go to
Right.
anywhere. At one point, I used to be able to get up and go straight to my desk and read and write, and then like an hour in, go get coffee. But now I'm at a point where I like want coffee as soon as I get started. But yeah, and then I use specific days where I'm gonna have a lot of prolonged time to do revision. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about reworking pieces during those first writing sessions. I'm just really like working through the morning, working through some thoughts that I've had. I try this every now and then. I engage in a poem a day for a month. And this year, while I am serving poet laureate and I'm not working a full-time job. I'm really blessed and privileged. So I've been thinking, well, I should do a poem a day. So I've been practicing a poem a day for every day of the year, with the exception of a couple of weeks that I got a little like just way too crazy busy to try
Mhm.
to do it. But I've been trying to draft, and a poem a day is not like, oh, these like the stuff that I just read. No, that doesn't come in a day. But it comes out of that practice. So it means I maybe only write 2 or 3 lines one day. And maybe the next day I write the draft of something that I really want to work on. Or maybe the next day I'm reworking something that I wrote back 3 months ago that has stuck with me. But it's not like, oh, I'm writing these like profound. No, I give myself grace. I think that oftentimes people believe that you wait until the feeling comes to you and then you get to write. Well, the feeling comes to you when you're driving to go pick up kids. The feeling comes to you
Mhm.
in the middle of an interview. And so oftentimes the way to like kind of allow myself to be present in whatever I'm doing is like, well, my poetry writing happens all the time. It happens every day. And it allows for me when the inspiration was only coming like once or twice every 4 or 5 months, and I would get like 1 or 2 poems. And I hate to think about it on a capitalistic idea of production, but you write 1 or 2 poems every 3 or 4 months, and you don't write anything else. And maybe you don't come back to those. Maybe you get 1 poem every 6 months because of that process of waiting for the inspiration to come. But by doing 1 poem a day, and just say for 30 days, you're gonna do it. Out of those 30 drafts that you write, you get two pieces that you really want to keep working on. And I, in this weird way, I got 2 poems in 1 month and then 1 poem in 4 months. For me, it just feels much more fruitful, much more, and I feel much more contemplative, because if you say you're gonna write a poem a day, everything is a poem. Everything. The girls walking down the street today is today's poem. That memory of me falling down the stairs in the mall is today's poem. Like, everything is a result of a poem. And then the big word poem, the magical word poem, becomes more grounded for me.
Yes.
And I write poems that I would have never thought to have written if I weren't doing that practice. So,
Do you have another poem you want to share?
Sure. I would like to do something a little bit. You mentioned Toni Morrison, so I thought I can read something that's inspired by the documentary of her work.
Mm.
It's not specifically about her, but it's
Yeah.
definitely inspired by her. In praise of more important things. Praise the bonnet, the slip up her dress, the red skirt in a jazz club, the greased scalp and laid curl. Praise the cracking voice calling from the kitchen at dawn. Praise ruffle and tulle, t-shirts and blow pops, and knowing how to leave a hot comb on long enough to straighten, but not enough to scorch. Praise ashy knuckles and aunties that warm them. Small patent leather shoes dragging down the sidewalk to Sunday school. Praise the dancing tree and ghosts. Praise the uncle's leg and how he forgets that limp every Sunday in the house of the Lord. In praise of more important things, praise brown legs and tan palms. Praise the audacity of kindness and hope and goodness. Praise the sacred basement sweat and rub, the weight of an overloaded family reunion cookout plate. Praise every smack and licked finger, and praise the skillet, crock pot, and the baking pan, soiled and piled up in every Labor Day kitchen sink. Praise the hands that will clean them. Praise the morning dweller in her lake cottage, recording all our unimportant things. Praise her eyes and her hand and her pen.
Praise her. Oh, goodness. Yeah.
I love that she was able to capture things about us that I don't think we knew were
Mhm.
material for great literature until she did it. And so,
Mhm.
yeah.
Mm. I'm going to do something that scares me. I'm going to read a poem to a poet.
Yay! You're reading a poet to the whole community. Let's listen. I want to hear.
I was just trying to think of, I'm going to read Kinfolk in your honor. Sometimes I can see something so clearly, but I can't tell you what it is, only how it feels. So I whisper it to you so that only you can hear, but not the naysayers. And the way you look back at me says you feel it too, inside of your own visions. And your version of our vision is so much more than I could see alone. And so we sit here holding our visions, sharing our secrets, whispering, and then we rise to run, chasing love and liberation, longing for the kind of soul food our bellies have hungered for, but only tasted a time or two in morsels, not meals. So then we throw in a little of this and a little of that, a teaspoon maybe a pinch from our palms. Sometimes it's a bushel of goodness, and suddenly our pot and our plates are so full that it takes two hands to hold them and many mouths to eat the abundant, rich textures and taste. They're steaming from a cauldron that's been burned and pressed into metal that can withstand the heat. We long to share this soul food with others, to fill their bellies too. It's that kind of food you taste way after the meal is over, the kind you wake up smelling, pouring from your pores. It's familiar and foreign. And as you smell it, you remember that it's grandmother's recipe, the one she planted in you when you were two, the one she whispered into your apron-clad body that you're whispering now to your kinfolk, to the youngins, to all who will listen. And you remember what she told you, this food, it will change the world. You will change the world. You will heal. You will do it with others. Do it. Feed and heal the people.
Mm. Hmm.
Thank you, Lauren. I appreciate that. Um, mm. So we do like to, folk are all up in the comments, but I want to just pause to ask folks who are with us today, if you have questions of Nandi, you can drop them in chat. Nandi, as folks are gathering their thoughts, I wonder if you were like, what do I want this audience of, thoughtful, action-oriented folk, like, what do I want them to know and to carry, away from this conversation? Perhaps work that you're involved in that's really important to you. I want to give you the floor, and then it'll give time for some comments and questions to flow in, and then we'll begin to wrap up.
Sure. I think one of the things that I think about as a poet, oftentimes people are asking, like, how is it that poetry is a part of a resistance movement, and how is it that we equip people that want to continue doing poetry but feel like the road is pretty like foggy, and like you don't get invited in. Um, my work now is really geared towards that. Like, I love working with youth. I love doing youth workshops. I love leading youth into like letting them know how they can access their own self-expression, but also if any of them want to take it on as a profession, I want to be a mentor. And that mentoring isn't just uh, limited to youth. I find mutual mentoring between other poets, that we're both trying to get something done. And so I love to I don't like it when there's like this top-down relationship with poets. I want it to be an exchange. There's so many things that I feel like in my skill set, I still need to work on. And so I love when I can have mutual writing relationships, but also I recognize the limited resources we have for writers in Detroit in terms of learning how to get their work out there. So I had a project called Detroit Lit. Detroit Lit it does not do creative workshops. I like to tell people that straight up front, because there are a lot of organizations here in Detroit that support writers to make their work stronger. That's not the lane that we want to be in. What we want to do is, once you feel like you have a finished piece, or if you want to learn more about how to take your writing more professionally, that's where we are. So we provide reading opportunities and professional development for writers. This summer, we're doing a intensive where there'll be a workshop on how do you pitch your book to an editor, and there'll also be a CV workshop. And I'm working on putting together a panel with several people from the industry, just so that people who are thinking about being writers or want to take their writing even further, so that they can know at what point do you need a publicist? At what point do you need to contract a copy editor? I think a lot of writers feel very like that's where we lose them. It's not when they write, because anyone who's writing knows the benefits of it. And so many people with so many great ideas, and there's so many places you can take your writing, whether or not you want to self-publish or go to an editor or go to a publishing house. And I want to try to make this experience less foggy for writers in Detroit, because we don't have institutions in Detroit that really support writers in understanding that. Almost all the writers I know in Detroit have gotten to where they are because they had mentors or because they had to leave the city in order to get that information.
Yeah. This idea of I love this idea of like, how do we lower those barriers of access to the world of writing? And one of the questions that came in was kind of related. I'm going to ask it, even though in some ways you answered it in terms of these offerings you have. And while I'm reading this, if does Detroit Lit have a website, or is there a way, and if you don't have it right now, is there a way we can get that out to folks? But Lauren, who's with us, who's just a solid human being, asked, Nandi, any advice for aspiring or struggling writers? Lauren works a lot with youth, and but she's also saying this could be open to all writers. And a lot of what you said as a writer myself really speaks to me. You know, the where do you go? You know, how do you go from the idea to the conversion into something that can be offered, you know, more broadly? And I think with social media, you see people like, my book is out, right? I'm loving Black liturgies, for example, and Cole Arthur Riley said she wrote the book in 43 days. I'm like, in what for? It's been 4,300 days. I'm trying to write this book.
So
Any
I
advice?
want to ask Lauren if you wouldn't mind coming on audio and telling me what is the struggle, because I do think that it's different depending on what the struggle is.
Yeah, of course. Hi. I
Hey.
think that it's kind of a couple prongs, because I'm like, there's kind of a distance between like myself as a writer, and I'm like thinking about it in that way, but I'm more thinking about this as a teacher. So I was an English teacher, but I'm now not in the classroom anymore. And so just more as I'm helping our teachers, our English teachers, be able to connect with young people. We often, obviously, I don't like to write. I'm not a writer. That kind of stuff from young people. So as we're trying to kind of like shift their mindset about themselves, that they have incredible things to say, that they have brilliant ideas, that we're just trying to help them kind of capture those ideas. And then also recognizing that like they don't have to write it down, they can record it, it can be video. Like there's many different modalities for writing, and it doesn't necessarily be written. But just kind of thinking about like either folks who are like, writing is not for me, or folks that are just kind of like thinking about wanting to be a writer, but it just seems so like insurmountable of a mountain to cross, right? So just, yeah, kind of multiple
Yeah.
audiences at the same time, I guess.
So there are a couple of things. There's so many things that I could give you as kind of tools for engaging young writers. Some of them are also connected to the way in which an individual might write. One of the things I think is very important to be in conversation with other folk that teach writing. There are a couple of organizations in the city, particularly Inside Out Literary Arts Project, that work in Detroit and beyond. I'm not sure where you're located, but writers in the school programs will oftentimes, if not bring writers into classrooms to help tackle the barrier of writing. But also they'll do teacher trainings sometimes. The other thing is there are tons of publications out there. Inside My Magic Pencil is one that Inside Out put out, which was just essays of writers talking about the things that they use in the classroom. I can maybe come up with some other ones in a bit, but I think for me is that when I come into a classroom, one of my rules for teaching writing is I always locate it in their experiences. So we always do brainstorming first before we do any kind of writing so that they are specifically thinking about as many different options that they can have. So for example, if we're going to be talking about memories, before we even get started, I get them just, hey, let's brainstorm 3 memories that you'll never forget, so that they can't tell me I don't have any memories when it's time to actually write about your memories because you've already done it, right? Or if you don't want to write about those memories, and now that's where we're going. For a long time, up until like our recent ancestor, Lucille Clifton, we lost her. I would say no dead poets. And a lot of that was because I wanted students to get access to poetry that spoke in the language that they speak now. And so I think about who's in the classroom. Recently, I did a workshop in Lansing. My first day was a very generic kind of workshop because I wanted to know who was in the room. I didn't know who was going to be there. And once I got there, I realized, oh, they have a lot of Muslim immigrants from all over the world. So they have Sudanese immigrants, they have East African, West African, Middle Eastern immigrants that were all in this room with, rural white students. And so the next packet I brought, we were talking about things that we love. And so there was a Filipino poet, there was a Muslim poet, there was a Latino poet. So to get them to understand that like this isn't just about, mainstream America, and letting them know that I do see them, that they can see other people I think that's the other thing, is making sure today's writers, today's young people see experiences that they see out in the world. The TikTok and the Instagram world means that they have access to so many different backgrounds now. And so for me, it's not, even as a writer, most of us have said that we didn't really like the literature we were introduced to because it didn't reflect us. Reflecting us doesn't just mean that they got to be this Black girl from Detroit. It could just mean that like, yeah, no, Shakespeare has never said anything that I would have said out in the world. And so therefore, I want to hear somebody like Lucille Clifton or Tracy K. Smith, who are not from Detroit. They just Black women that use today's language that made me feel that I could connect to that more than maybe some dated literature. I also think we have to give them time. We cannot ask them to write these, like, we want them to give themselves, but we also don't build in time for them to trust us with their stories. We don't build in time for them to do other activities that help them move through the writing. Like if you have a box that's closed with a whole bunch of tape, you got to cut the tape first before you can even open up a flap. And so maybe the writing is deep in that box, but you have to do other activities of trust forming that will help them get to a point where they can actually open up these floodgates of what is in their interiority. I think the last thing I love, like the other thing is that I'm always like, take out a sheet of paper or your devices or whatever you're writing on today, which is another thing that I had to get used to because I started teaching in 2099. And so the idea of social media wasn't even a thing, yet alone trying to everyone having their own laptop. And so to go from those kind of circumstances to other circumstances where you could have a student writing with pen and paper, a student that is using their phone, a student that is using something else, but also sometimes you have students who are visual in their way that they express too. Then I'm like, if you want to draw it out, and you'll find that they might write a story next to that drawing too when they're talking about it. So I think self-expression comes in a lot of ways, but I have I could go on for days with that kind of thing. As a writer, an adult writer, I think it's really important to find community, to find a tribe, to really find people that will challenge you and give you ways of approaching writing that is outside of your comfort zone, outside of your practice. I have a daily practice and I still write better every day when I go into a classroom because that teacher is controlling how I'm going to write that day, not me. So
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Lauren, great question. And thank you always for the way you love on our babies in this community. I honor you. Whew. I'm full, and there was a way in which like the teacher emerged from you in this last bit with Lauren that I loved like witnessing. I can see your love of the craft, but also of those of us who are interested in it, who want to engage with narrative and one word you said, like our interiority. I mentioned Cole, Arthur Riley, and I love the way that she is inviting us to explore the inner worlds of Black women and femmes. You got a lot of love in the chat. I am so curious about these retreat spaces for writing. Thank you, Lauren, for Black women and for bodies of culture. So if you don't mind offline, if you share those for my own personal understanding, but also I'd love to share it back with folks here in this space. One of my favorite humans in the world, Monica Marie Jones, is with us, and I love her writing. I was just talking about the way she's able to synthesize really big concepts into bite-sized pieces that we can access. So I know Monica would love to know about some of those retreat spaces, and maybe there's a way y'all could get connected, because Monica took me and a group of folk to Morocco last fall. There's a sister out of Connecticut who's relocated to Morocco and purchased, hey Monica, purchased a retreat space there. Her name is Tanisha Barnes. And what did we do, Monica? We wrote, we rested. Tell us a little bit about it, Monica. Nandi should know.
We had a day of being loved on at the spa, scrubbed down from head to toe, massaged. We went mining in the Sahara Desert, glamping in the Sahara Desert. We danced with live musicians from the Gnawa tribe around the fire, and we stargazed on a beautiful sand dune at night in the Sahara and just like cried and healed together.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful space. If y'all don't know each other, you should. Nandi, thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank
I
you.
enjoyed my time.
I was looking at your schedule in case folks wanted to catch you while you're on your trip, and it looks like you're up north through the fall.
No.
Okay. Okay.
There
Tell
are
us.
a lot of dates in between there.
Okay. Okay.
Here, I'll put this here. This is my that's the direct link to the events on my
Wonderful.
website. Some of those events are closed to the schools that I am, visiting. But the next event is actually near you. I'll be in Ypsilanti this third Friday. Yes, hold on. Let me make sure, because I said today. No, yes, Friday. I'll be in Ypsilanti at the Freight House at 7:30.
Hey, I love that. We gotta get out. Okay, y'all. Show up and show out for Nandi. Yay. At the Freight House this Friday, which is April 19th. I'm gonna try my best to get there to see you and to squeeze you and to thank you. Your spirit, your work, your generosity is like a refreshing. It's a refreshing of my spirit, and I appreciate you deeply.
Thank you.
Come back anytime and let us
Oh.
know how we can continue to support you, okay?
This was great. Thank you so much.
You bet. All right, everybody, just dropped in the feedback survey. We'd love to hear from you all, what you want to hear more about on centering justice. Next month in May, we are going to be talking about racially restrictive covenants and the untold histories that these covenants reveal about communities all over the country, but especially right here where I am in Washtenaw County. We'll be joined by students, law students, by community organizers, and by researchers who are creating a visual map of Washtenaw County's segregationist history. So I hope that you'll join us. It's a bit of a leap from beautiful poetry with Nandi, but important as we continue this season to use storytelling and narrative to reimagine the future for all of us. So hope you'll join us. I think it's on May 17th, but y'all know it's always on a Wednesday. Thank you, Heather Martin, for sharing the UMS performance as well. So y'all give us some feedback and join us next month, and check out Nandi this Friday, April 19th at the Ypsilanti Freight House.